can never be completed without expert views from the taxation experts. So thanks to our partner, Juba Advisors LLP, to Mr. Aditya Hans, Mr. Rishi Kapadia, and Mr. Rajneet Prahatani. We are running behind 10 minutes for our next session, Industry Perspectives. And the speakers are with us. So we have with us Honorary Brigadier Dr. Arvind Lal, Padma Shri Executive Chairman, Dr. Lal PathLabs Limited, CA Dr. Vijaya Kumar Sahu, founder and mentor, Sai International Education Group, Mr. Chetan Jain, Director, Inspira Private Limited, Mr. Jain Mehta, CMO, Senior General Manager, Planning and Marketing, GCMMF, more popularly known as Amul, Mr. Raju Bharat, Managing Director, Kenilworth Hotels, India, and the session will be moderated by Mr. Aditya Hans. So I would request Aditya to please take the session forward and welcome you all to this Industry Perspectives on the Union Budget 21-22.
Thank you, Angana. Thank you very much. I am looking at the profile of all the panelists. I am somewhere tempted to speak a little more about them before we get into the session. Many of them don't need an introduction. But Angana, with your permission, can I take 2 to 3 minutes introducing each of the panelists?
You're the boss.
Thank you, Angana. Brigadier Dr. Arvind Lal, Padma Shri, Executive Chairman at Dr. PathLabs. Well, Honorary Brigadier Dr. Padma Shri, how much more should I say? He is a pioneer in bringing laboratory services in India at par with the Western world, awarded with the Padma Shri in 2009. He is the first civilian doctor to be granted an honorary brigadier's rank in the Armed Forces Medical Services in 2009. He revolutionized laboratory medicine by introducing the maximum number of new tests, instruments, and ICT, that's Information Communications Technology Systems in India. His R&D unit has done India proud by developing the latest tests in molecular diagnostics, cryogenics, and genetics, and many more. That's Dr. Arvind Lal for you. The next panelist is CA Dr. Vijay Kumar Sahu, founder and mentor, Sai International Education Group. Well, I take pride he is from my fraternity, the Chartered Accountant fraternity. It gives me immense pride that someone from the Chartered Accountant, a cost accountant, and a graduate in law, who's today an educationist, entrepreneur, philanthropist, and he's brought a pioneering revolution in the education scenario of Odisha, with his innovative approaches to nurture children through value-based and internationally benchmark education. He's a founder and mentor of Sai International Education Group, comprising Sai International School, Sai Angan, Sai International Residence School, Sai International College of Commerce. He's an advisor cum working president of Odisha Adarsh Vidyalaya Sangathan, appointed by the government of Odisha in the rank and status of Minister of State, with a mission to establish 314 CBSE English medium schools in each block of Odisha. Dr. Sahu, so it's so good to see that how he is involved in changing the education, the scenario around education. So this is way before the national education policy was announced. So his initiatives in Odisha are reaping, the population of Odisha is reaping the benefits, and there's more to come. I remember meeting up with him and he was telling me what the Chief Minister and Mr. Sahu, Dr. Sahu are doing. It is amazing, I can tell you. He was bestowed with the most coveted Quality Champion Award in 2020 for his perfection of process and dedication to quality education and his contribution towards innovation, digital technology, and scientific development. And again, the Chartered Accountant, Cost Accountant, graduate in law, Master in Business Administration, specializing in finance and treasury, doctorate in commerce, and so goes on. That's Dr. Sahu for you. He has a mission in life, which is let's build a better India through education. The next panelist is Chetan Jain. He's a director at Inspira Enterprise India Private Limited. A little bit about Inspira Enterprise. For more than a decade, Inspira has been providing digital transform solutions in areas of cybersecurity, cloud, analytics, blockchain. Mr. Jain has been overseeing banking and enterprise team with overall strategy and go-to-market approaches. He also handles companies' investment portfolio, ensuring diversity and profitability. In the past 12 years, under his leadership, the company has got a global footprint in Singapore, Sri Lanka, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Kenya, Ethiopia, and USA. So he's the young blood in the panel. So we'll get a and my questions to him will be more targeted around startups, technology, innovation, R&D. Mr. Raju Bharat, I think so. For Calcuttans, he needs no introduction. The managing director at Kenilworth Hotels India. He's the chairman and managing director of Kenilworth Group of Hotels. The group owns and manages hotels in Goa, Kolkata and Goa, and in Coimbatore. He's an experienced owner with a demonstrated history of working in the hospitality sector for the last 30 years. And the recently group has also ventured into real estate. The Goa hotel is a 5-star resort and the Kolkata is a 4-star and has completed 50 years of successful operations. So anyone who's a Calcuttan will have really nostalgic memories around Kenilworth. The last panelist is Mr. Jayan Mehta, CMO Senior General Manager Planning and Marketing, Amul. Well, Amul needs no introduction, so does Mr. Jayan Mehta, doesn't need any introduction, but nevertheless, I'll do so. He's a Senior General Manager Planning and Marketing at Gujarat Corporate Amul, which is India's largest food products marketing organization with an annual sales turnover of 52,000 crores. So we get a different perspective, an FMG perspective with him, and well, dairy comes in essentials actually. So we'll also get a perspective around essentials. Mr. Mehta has been associated with Amul since last 30 years, has rich experience in domestic and international marketing of entire range of Amul products. He also served as in charge for managing director of Amul Dairy, Anand, in 2018. So these are the distinguished panelists for you. I will just put up the questions. Just give me a second. Angana, can you help me? Is the presentation visible?
You can put it in the slide mode. Yeah, it is visible.
It is visible. Great.
Yeah, thank you. It's good now.
So my first question is to all the panelists, and the most obvious question has to be something around the pandemic. So I'll just read out the question and I'll just reflect. I'll also display certain graphs which I could pick up from the economic survey, from the union budget, and certain data points. Mixing and matching all of the data points. These are my questions. The government imposed lockdown when there were few hundred cases in India. It put lives of its citizens over economy, recognizing that while GDP growth will recover from temporary shock caused by the pandemic, human lives that are lost cannot be brought back. The public health measures adopted to contain the spread of COVID-19 increased immediate economic costs as it led to almost suspension of economic activity. And we all have seen that. It curbed consumption and investment as well as restricted labor supply and production. The steps taken to flatten the COVID-19 inflection curve were good, but steepened the recession curve. And to this effect, I would want to reflect a particular diagram. This is something which comes from the economic survey, where the government said that it's sort of justifying its decisions that had I not done this, we would have seen a peak at a very early stage in the months of April, May itself, with the number of cases being very high. So the red would have been what it would have been had the lockdown not been imposed, a stringent lockdown. And blue is what we are seeing today. So a more prolongated lockdown, a more prolongated period. The economic went to a larger period through the recession, but lesser lives were lost. Vis-a-vis, the red would have been, had they not imposed a lockdown, prices would have come sooner, faster, number of cases would have been higher, most likely the deaths would have been higher, and we would have come out of the recession a lot more faster. This is one side of the story, which has come from the economic survey, where the government is trying justifying its action. It also gives one more graph which says that if you look at the red line and the blue line, the red line is what it would have been, and the blue line is what it has. So if you look at the lower part of the graph, it is the economic growth, and the upper part is the new cases. So the blue is what happened. So the severity of the recession was a lot more intense was a lot more deep. It affected the Indian economy even more because there was a lot more stringent lockdown. The cases, which is the blue, if you look at the upper part of the graph, they were lesser. And it justifies by saying that had we not gone for such a severe lockdown, the recession would not have been so severe, which is the red in the bottom part of the graph. But the number of cases would have been higher. And to this, it compares itself to the A is the blue line, if you see, that's the emerging economy, advanced economies like US, Canada, UK. So the blue line, where it got the first wave in April, the second wave around July, August, September, and now it's facing the third wave. If you look at the emerging economies, other than China and India, which is a yellow line, it got the first wave around July, August, and it's now facing the second wave, like Brazil, South Africa, these countries. Whereas India is the green dotted line. It has just faced one wave till December and not expected to face a second wave. And even if the vaccination is around the corner, it's rather being given to the health workers and it will be disseminated to the larger population by end of the year. So India, in the justification, has fared better. I'm not discussing the China graph. That's that data I'm not discussing. But India, they say vis-a-vis A's, that is the advanced economies, which is the blue line, the emerging economies, which is the yellow line. They are at the green line. They fared way better because the number of deaths have been lower. There is a single wave which has come, and it was all due to the wisdom of the government of a stringent lockdown. And when it compares itself to the number of, because the WHO and many of the global bodies had suggested that there will be a lot more deaths. So there was a prediction on the number of deaths in each of the countries or the number of cases in each of the countries. India has fared the best vis-a-vis Brazil, US and Mexico. So if there was a prediction of say 100 people would die, vis-a-vis that only 20 people have died. So that ratio, that's a green line, and India has fared better than what the world predicted it would happen in India. Vis-a-vis US, Brazil, Mexico, where there were not stringent lockdowns, what was predicted that there would be, say, 50 deaths, but there would be 100 deaths. So it will be a lot more. These are in absolute numbers. So in this context, I would like to invite views from Dr. Lal, that this view which the government is selling, is it actually, do you buy that? In simple words, do you buy this logic which the government is giving to the audience, to the masses at large, that this is what the real story is and we have been successfully in curve? Because I feel that the worst is yet to come. That's also one side of the story. So Dr. Lal, what are your views on this?
Thank you very much, Aditya, and thank you, Angana, and special thanks to Bengal Chamber of Commerce for getting me here. So, being from the health sector, we were pretty much in the eye of the storm. So, I must first, tell you a historical perspective of this, that right now, what the government is saying is partially correct. And partially in the sense that we could have done better. But again, we will discuss all those, other factors, which could have been better, could not have been changed, etc. But I would like to quickly take you back to 1918 and 1920, when the Spanish flu hit the world, and it was the closing hours of the First World War, and the Indian troops coming back from the First World War, which brought the Spanish flu. By the way, that was a misnomer. It was started in the trench warfare between the English, the Americans, the French, the Germans. But since they suppressed the news and it reached Spain, therefore it came to be highlighted as the Spanish flu. In that, epidemic, more than 3 crore people all over the world died, and 1.8 died in India itself. And I remember reading the excerpts of a poet at that time, Nirala, who said that the Ganges were swollen with dead bodies because there was no wood, left to burn the bodies. So quickly coming back to the present situation, I think we have done much better. And I must highlight that we could have done even better But we have been underinvesting on health over decades, with public spend on health close only to about 1% of GDP. And out of this, 65% are out of pocket expenses, which thereby pushes about 5 to 7% of our population below the poverty line every year. So this 65% of out of pocket expenses can be brought down to about 35% if the government spends 2.5% of GDP on health, which has been promised by the government itself in the National Health Policy of 2017. So underinvestment in health has really hit India hard at the time of the battling of this COVID. And our health systems are unprepared, and therefore we had to shut our entire economy to organize and ramp up the healthcare resources with very stringent lockdown, which we have aptly shown in your graphs. So what we were able to do was that we did not have personal protection equipment, we did not have gloves, we did not have ventilators, we did not have those oxygen supplies, we did not have kits even for testing. And there were hardly any labs, I think 1 or 2 labs, NIV of Government of India, etc. And today I can say because of this flattening of the so-called curve, today we are carrying out tests of RT-PCR in about 1,350 Indian labs, both government, I think 60% are private, 40% are government. And our lab, we have been there for a long time. We were one of the first labs to be given this. And I'm happy to, share with, everybody that one fine day we did all over India 15 lakh tests of RT-PCR testing. And I'm glad to say that our own lab has crossed a figure of 1 billion tests by now. So what I would like to say is that yes, this is correct, but we could have been better prepared. So Aditya, I'd like to stop here for the time being.
Thank you, Dr. Lal. This was helpful. I would like to take a perspective from Dr. Sahu. Do you agree with what Dr. Lal says, or you have a little different view? The government could have done a lot more because you're on the ground at Odisha. What is your take on this?
At the outset, I'd like to thank BCCI and Dhruv for giving me this opportunity, and Aditya, a friend and colleague, for inviting me to share my views. I agree to Dr. Lal's statement that we were first conscious that health is a priority first time in India. I also agree to the fact that when you said the economic survey report, to me also appeared that it was on the defensive. Like, a good batsman, when he is not anticipating how the ball is going to swing, he'll rather be defensive than scoring runs. So that's what I think the economic survey report did. The economic survey report was justifying the actions of the last 9-10 months rather than telling what India should have done or what India is going to do. More is on, that we saved 1 lakh lives. We did a calibrated flow of the incentives. We were conserved with resources for the bad times to come. So I felt when somebody goes into defensive, there is some issue there. So I'll not elaborate on that. The other issue I like to say that, yes, there was no historical recording of 1918 Spanish flu. And the situation then and the situation now are absolutely different. However, can a country which is aspiring to be a 5 trillion economy have such state of health and education? Had this lockdown not happened, I do not know what havoc it would have created. Yes, the lockdown saved lives. But why the lockdown was announced? Because not probably to save more lives, probably to ramp up the health infrastructure. As Dr. Lal was telling that we had only 2 testing labs. Can you imagine a country of this diversity and this size having just 2 labs to test? And I know from Orissa, the samples were being sent to Pune, in the initial months. The health infrastructure was absolutely bizarre, and it took time. But resilient India could come up. But worse than that, was the impact on education and on the economy. Education, as such, India's school education and to some extent the higher education, the qualitative parameters, if you see, the beautiful report published by CSF, states that of the 50% of the 25 crore people, 25 crore children are in the school education, out of which around 12 crore children are in the private system and about 13 lakh children in the government system. Is it pathetic for me to confess here that out of these 13 crore children who are in the school education in the government sector, 80% of them were out of schools. And there was no way that this digital education or online education could reach them. And that's the state of affairs. And even in the private sector, almost 60% could be reached, and around 40%, children, even in private schools, could not give the required digital education. And on the economy side, if you see, the way the migrant labor issue could not be handled, that cascaded, the pain of larger India. There was time, for ramping up the infrastructure probably for the migrant workers or devising some means of containing them in their workplace rather than moving and, creating more of problems. The way the mini budgets, 5 mini budgets were announced, and these 5 mini budgets coming into reality took little time, and for the banks giving the benefit to the entrepreneurs is still to come. So I think there was some, the intention of government was absolutely clear and loud. However, the process and the delivery system that we have in India probably, created the roadblocks. That's what is the budget, the last leg of the budget says that, a minimum government and maximum governance. And that is a reality, it's required. I feel much could have been done. I'll not tell that let's ape West, because, the trade-off between life and livelihood, India has done far better. If we see the samples research done by Economic Times, where the government did, and I'll end in 30 seconds, did well as far as the pandemic is concerned. India did extremely well in handling the pandemic. India did extremely well in rolling out of the vaccine. However, India did extremely bad in handling the economy and the fiscal stimulus. It mishandled the migrant work crisis, it mishandled the farmer issues, and it mishandled the economy. So this is what the Times of India survey says. So this is, I think, what are my initial remarks on this. But as you know, India has always come out of any crisis. That's why, India is always said, India is a country of jugaad. So even the policies are in a particular place, we as Indians are so resilient, we will find our way to come out of the crisis and build India to be better India. That's with that hope that we'll be able to build a much better India. I think let's all be very positive and optimistic.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. That's a very, very interesting perspective. You've been critical of where it needs to be, and you've been appreciative of where it needs to be. With two such senior people giving the views, I thought it's time that we get a view from a young panelist, Mr. Chetan Jain. Mr. Chetan, then could you give your views on what are your views? Did the government cope up well? Was it right in its approach over the nice 9 to 10 months? What's your views on this?
Thank you, Aditya. I'd like to first thank Bengal Chamber of Commerce for giving us this opportunity I have a little different, view on this, to be honest. So, and we can always look at hindsight. We could have said that yes, maybe the lockdown was a week too long or a week too early. There's a lot of theories that we can all come up with. We of course had I believe 72 to 75% of businesses were dealt a blow. We had salary decreases, maybe about more than 50% is what the stats say across industries. And that has been, of course, given a lot of pain. But that pain, from my point of view, is more short-term pain, if you ask me, for long-term gains. And if you see the current economy, and it is on a V-shaped recovery, as we all see it. This is purely thanks to the stable macroeconomic situation that we are in right now, which could be due to our currency being stable, our current account being very, very comfortable, the increase in forex reserves, and that's primarily because of how people are seeing India, right? And if you look at it, I think we are one of the best placed country around the world right now in terms of our economy. And which is why you're seeing so much of inflow of cash coming in from various global investors. The manufacturing sector output has gone up, but all this is also possible thanks to the whole digitization process that we've embarked in the last few years, right? We talk about work from home, and we say now that it's a norm, it's something which easily be done. But if you see, it's all thanks to our connectivity. To be honest, when we look at basics right now, paying our phone bills, paying our utility bills, paying our school fees, would it have been possible without this whole digitization? I don't think so. And for us to be able to do this sitting at home is truly remarkable for a large population of our country. So I think kudos to this government to at least look at I would say digitization as a norm. If you look at digital payments, you look at digital education, e-commerce, buying ration, sitting out of your through your mobile phone, sitting at home, mobile banking, which is such a norm right now. But without all of this, I think it's been really, really difficult for us to get over this pandemic, and I think we've truly done remarkable. So I think there's a long way to go, of course, and but I believe we've done well.
Thanks, Chetan. I would want to invite Raju Bharat to give his views. He represents a sector, probably I think so no other sector has been impacted the way his sector, the hospitality sector. And Mr. Bharat, over to you, please.
Thank you, Aditya. Thank you, Angana, and thank you, BCCI, for having me as a panelist. Well, I don't think I can add much, but I think kudos to the government, because I think there are three factors here which worked well. And one was, I feel, the government that came in very quickly. And even though we felt that the lockdown was premature, but I think that helped when you see the results today. And looking at our numbers, our population, and the number of deaths and the number of cases, when we compare ourselves to the Western world, the more advanced world, we find that we are in a much more advantageous position at this moment. So that was one area which I felt, whether it was banning travel from foreign destination, closing our borders, creating different zones, and monitoring the situation very closely with good testing and management of COVID patients, increasing hospital beds. I think the effort was national, the intention was there, and the government has performed on that front. But I think a lot has to be done in the future. And I also feel that it was the citizens of the country also that, we Indians can be very indisciplined, but when it came to COVID, I think we all came together and understood the enormous problem that we would have faced. And we took it. We cooperated, we took all the precautions that were necessary. And I think that also helped in managing this crisis, which is still not over. And the third thing I feel very strongly about is that, which is something very natural to India, is the weather conditions. Viruses, especially in winter, they have a tendency to in cold climates and in cold countries, they tend to spread easily. So that way we are blessed with certain natural factors. Also robust immunity. I think Indians have a very high immunity system, and that has also helped. We have a very young population. And also, I would say Amitabh Bachchan reminding us on the phone every time we picked up the phone also helped in terms of just creating that awareness. So I think it was a combination of all these factors that has really helped us in bringing down the numbers. And now, being one of the countries with the capacity to manufacture vaccines, I mean, that's a great comfort. And especially for our industry, the hospitality industry, which I think has been really hit the worst and devastated in the last 8 months. I mean, business came to a complete halt. So with nothing on the budget for us, I think the vaccine is something we're looking forward to. And we hope that it will be soon rolled out and we should have the economy, at least our industry, there'll be more confidence and we hope to see better numbers coming up. So that's my take on what's happening with COVID. Thank you.
Mr. Mehta, that's very heartening to see that you've accepted this, the economic recession, which was a consequence of the lockdown, with open arms. I was not expecting that, Mr. Bharat, but that's what India is all about. For the sake of the country, the commercial losses cannot stand in the way. Mr. Jain Mehta, I would. You deal in dairy. I don't think so. Your sales would have gone down. That's probably the essentials we all were surviving on. Probably my milk intake or my tea intake did actually go up. My coffee intake went up. And in other words, my milk consumption did go up on a lighter note. So Mr. Mehta, what is your view on this? You've got 4 views. You are the final panel. Please.
Right. Thanks, Aditya, and thanks the Bengal Chamber for having me here again. It's always a pleasure to be here. The pandemic has been real, and like Dr. Arvind Lal and other distinguished members of this panel, we've been a part of the solution team. And you may recall that when we met in a webinar earlier in May here at the same Bengal Chambers, I told about how Amul and our team of 36 lakh farmer families across 18,500 villages, 84 dairy plants, 10,000 distributors and 1 million retailers were working round the clock to ensure that an essential product like milk and a variety of products are made available across the country. And the same happened, same work was done by all the state cooperative federations. And agriculture, as the economic survey also points out, was the sole bright spot in the Indian economy over the last 3 quarters. I mean, in the first quarter when we had met, the economy fell by about 30. I mean, the GDP fell by about 30%. Agriculture grew by about 3.4%. And the full year estimates also, when we are talking of -7% GDP growth rate this year, agriculture will continue to be at 3.4%. So that way, fact is that about 60% of India's population is still in rural areas. Agriculture might be contributing to only 18% of GDP. But because of the robustness, when other sectors face difficulties due to lockdown, be it the services like Mr. Raju Bharat mentioned, or industry, fact is that agriculture stood up and withstood and provided resilience and, more importantly, the nutrition to the masses. Having said that, milk is a very important component of India's agriculture. Actually, milk is the largest agricultural crop in the country today. And if you look at agriculture and all the crops as 100, milk is now 60% of it. So about 9.4 to 10% out of total 17.8% contribution of agriculture is milk. And just 5 years back, it was hardly 40%. So that way, as a sector, it's been doing well. And we provided the nutrition which the country required, the supply, uninterrupted supply which the country required during the pandemic. The worst is behind us, perhaps. But in the months ahead also, we need to be, as an economy, be resilient to what the problems we have faced. And at least food is one sector which will not let us down, like medicine, what Dr. Lal mentioned about the way in which they ramped up their facilities and looked at providing solution to millions of people across the country. Thank you.
Mr. Mehta, I just wanted an answer to that, whether the trade-off was right or not.
It was essential in a way that if you had not put a stop to or a pause to the activities, things could have gone out of hand. And if things go out of hand, it would have been very difficult to, so to say, bring back to normalcy. So in a way, yes, and that's why I'm saying the problem was real. The solutions had to be attempted, and all of us had to come together to work and deliver what at least was expected out of our respective industries.
Thank you, Mr. Mehta. It's very interesting. Chetan and Mr. Raju Bharat, whose businesses actually got impacted in this in these 9 to 10 months, but they do support the approach of the government for an intense lockdown, which affected the economy intensely. The severity of the recession was a lot more intense, but there was no other way out.
I would like to add, whenever the time is right, just a few points on our industry, whenever it's right, if it's possible.
I would.
So I think our industry has been the worst affected in terms of COVID, and we were expecting a lot from the budget. And what we wanted was actually short-term benefits, because in no way were we benefited, in no way were we helped by the government or by the state government or by the central government in any way. And this industry has been so badly impacted that we don't see recovery before 23, 24. And it's not a small industry. It contributes 10% of the GDP of the country, and we've been totally neglected. And this is something which has a very long-term impact on us. And already we can see almost 13 lakh restaurants closing down, hotels closing down, and the entire tourism, we've lost almost $1.3 trillion in the world economy due to this COVID. So this is something which we keep on lobbying for, but we are very disappointed in this time when we really need that hand-holding. And we contribute 10% of the GDP. We create almost 10 million jobs. But this time we've been totally let down, and we hope that better sense will prevail, and there will be some hand-holding and some support, both from the state as well as the central government. So this is a once-in-a-lifetime experience that the hospitality, the tourism industry is facing. So I just wanted to contribute that.
I completely understand. So no one questions the decision of the government to the lockdown, but I think so there should have been a fiscal stimulus to certain sectors like yours, which was very, very necessary, which is not there. And I do agree with you.
Thank you.
Moving to the next question. Yes. Yeah. This question is to Dr. Lal, as it pertains more to healthcare. Government highlighted in its economic survey the importance of priority in increasing central and state budget towards healthcare by acknowledging direct relationship of out-of-pocket payments for healthcare and risk of vulnerable groups slipping into poverty. So it says that because of an individual making this out-of-pocket on this extraordinary kind of expenditure which it comes, it could push a segment of the society into poverty. In the subsequent slides, we showcase public spend on healthcare as a percent of GDP by different economies, and the level of out-of-pocket expenditure, which is what the public makes, like we individuals, as it is low level of healthcare spend as a percentage of results, vis-a-vis the other countries. The government estimates that the increase in public spend on healthcare would significantly lower the expenditure by the public, and accordingly, the budget proposed a planned expenditure of 2.23 lakh crores in 21-22, vis-a-vis 0.94 lakhs in 2021, which is the COVID year itself. Does budget adequately provide for spend on healthcare, which would actually lower the expenditure by individuals to target 30%? Today it's around 60-65%, and reduce financial hardship. Before I request Dr. Lal to answer this question, I would just like to show certain financial data which was in the union budget. And so this is a breakup where they're saying that from 94 lakh crores, they will be moving to 2,23 lakh 846 crores. But if you look at the components, Dr. Lal, 35,000 is for vaccination. That's a one time. And a substantial part of it is drinking water and sanitation. So the government is claiming, but I feel like in 21-22, 1 lakh crore is on drinking water and sanitation and vaccination, which is itself. So is it claim which it is making, that I'm going to jump from 94 lakh to 24,000 to 2,23,000 crores, is it somewhere just a number, or because when you go into the details, you'd feel that there is the breakup of that expenditure gives a little different story. In the next slide, what the government is wanting to achieve, just for the audience, wanted to show that India, if you see on the graph, which is the left-hand side, it is around 65, which is the vertical side is that individuals in India spend 65 and the government spends the rest. So, and that 65, so the government is spending roughly 3 to 3.5% of the GDP. And that is why the individual, because if government starts spending roughly 6, 7, 8% of the GDP on healthcare, it will become a country like China or Indonesia, where they're spending 8 to 9% of the GDP on healthcare, and the out-of-pocket expenditure by the individuals is 35 or 30 or something like a Thailand. So the more you go to the right, the more the government is spending, the percentage of the GDP, the more the expenditure by individuals starts coming down, which is a target is 30%. Even if I look at 3% today, 3.5 or 3.5, that is government is targeting to take it to 7% of the GDP. But by putting something like a water and sanitation and all of that into this bucket, Dr. Lal, if you could decipher this for us, because this is what I could gather from the union budget and the economic survey.
Thanks, Aditya. I'll try my level best. There are experts sitting with me. I'm not a finance guy, but I'll still try. So health and well-being, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, is recognized as one of the 6 main pillars of India's development plan, much needed and apt at this time when we are trying to battle the COVID pandemic. Concept of health and well-being focuses on wider determinants of health as well, which include, as you correctly, thought, clean water, clean air, nutrition, etc. So today, the outlay for health and well-being marked at 2.23 lakh crores with an increase of 137% from last year is a very substantial figure. But we must note, as you have pointed out, that it includes allocation to, in addition to Department of Health, Family Planning, Health Research, Ayush, COVID vaccination. And above all, it includes drinking water, sanitation, as well as nutrition, which are technically not a part of the health budget, but are a part of achieving Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. So, if you please bring back your, the figure in which you had given it, you were absolutely on the right track. That there are last 3, items are not to be included in the health budget. So, therefore, ladies and gentlemen, what has happened is that increase in allocation to the 3 departments responsible for health, that is health and family welfare, health research, and Ayush, is only 11% increase. In addition, the government has also announced a new scheme, that is Prime Minister Atmanirbhar Swasth Bharat Yojana, which will be launched. It's futuristic, not present today, will be launched with an outlay of about 64,150 crores over the next 6 years, which amounts to about 10,700 crores a year. So if this is in addition to the current allocation for the health sector, and time will tell once the clarifications come, etc., and people like to ask the more soul-searching questions, then the allocation has gone up by approximately 27% to a total of 87,602 crores over last year's figure, which, according to me, was 69,234 crores. But this is still short of the National Health Program 2017 target of 2.5% of GDP by 2025. And now this, here is a punchline. This translates, now this is government's, it's in writing, that they will raise the health expenditure to spending to 2.5% of the GDP by 2025. This translates to spending 1.5 lakh crores approximately in the current budget, and thereby we have a shortfall today in this budget of 62,000 crores. This is what I would like to say. Thank you.
Dr. Lal, and I must confess, being a chartered accountant, I did fish out trouble in the waters. And I would not say that you confirm, but in your own way, you did say that there is a lot more to be done by the government, right? Thank you, Dr. Lal. Moving from healthcare, which is a primary concern today, and the government has promised. Rather, if you look at the stock markets and everyone, all the other markets, they are booming or they are flourishing. They are showing a positive sign only because the quantum of expenditure on healthcare and infra. So at least I've been able to decipher the health that the allocation there's a question mark around the allocation. But yes, Dr. Lal's words are quite comforting that there is the plan, the intention of the government is there, and there will be more to it in future. With this, I would like to move to the next question, which is on innovation and R&D. And this is again, I have picked up data which somehow, reading the report, I felt that government is trying to say that I am doing enough. It's just the private sector is not doing enough, and it's got a baggage of statistical data to prove that. So it says that, and this is a fact. The India might be in the top 10 economies, ranked around 5th or 6th today in size. But as far as the innovation is concerned, for the first time in 2020, it could make it into the list of top 50. So it was not even in the list of top 50, even though we were the 4th, 5th, 6th largest economy. We were in that path, we were there. But in innovation metrics, we were nowhere, not even in the top 50. So first of all, congratulations to India to at least make it in the top 50 in 2020. However, it still lags far behind when compared to the innovation index as a percentage of GDP. India seems to be underperforming in innovation with respect to the size of its GDP. To become an innovation leader, India needs greater trust on innovation. While government feels that it contributes a disproportionate large sum of expenditure in R&D, private sector's share is considerably lower when compared to large economies. Thus, this fact can be observed when one compares India residents' share in total patents filed compared to share of residents who have filed patents in large economies. While government puts onus on private sector to ramp up investments in R&D to boost innovation index, a question to ponder is, has the government done enough to motivate the private sector into undertaking R&D? Very recently, you would have, 2 days back, yesterday it was announced that 50,000 crores is being allocated over the next 5 years for National Research Foundation. And to support its view, so first of all, this is where India stands, 48. Vis-a-vis, you can see in the Global Innovation Index, where is US, UK, France, Germany, Japan, where all of them stand. China, Brazil. Brazil is a rank lower. In this regard, it justifies by way of this graph. It shows and states that I have done enough. If you see the first side, which is the left-hand side, which is the government sector, it says that India spends 36%, whereas if you look at the Indian government, actually, the government sector, China 12, Japan 7, Germany 15, UK 3, France 11. India, the government spends 36%. Whereas if I go to the business sector, that is the private sector, Indian private sector spends 30, whereas most of that expenditure on R&D innovation is coming from the private sector. So it says that I am doing enough as a government. It is the private players who have not done enough. So if we are in the state of affairs where we stand today, I have done enough, government is doing enough, you are not, the private players are not doing enough. And to further support it says that residents' share in patents application in India is the lowest compared to residents' share in patents application. Because the maximum patents which are filed in India is by non-residents who are doing business in India but not generating patents in India. So that's his justification that the Indian residents, that we individuals are not doing enough. We, the private players in India, are not doing enough. And I would like to stick to this graph, yes. I would like to invite Chetan, who is from the technology sector, who's in and around, surrounded by people who are looking at innovation, who are working around innovation. Invite his views around this. Chetan, please.
Thank you, Aditya. So I've got 3 main pointers here, and I'll start one first is with the startups. I think innovation, if you look at globally, startups are one who actually provide a lot of impetus on trying to build something new, something fresh, something which others don't want to do, because it's mainly by the youngsters who actually create this new kind of technology, which is, not being used or not being even thought about. So I think that's something which we, as not only public but even private, need to kind of look at startups. I know we've given them another year of their, they've got an income tax rebate, but I don't think that's enough, to be honest. Just like we're doing in terms of doing ease of business, the government should actually look at ease of doing research, if you ask me. I think we need to have policies in place where we can look at what are the type of both monetarily in terms of time, looking at direction given to these startups, less paperwork, so that we can try and increase the number of startups and ensure that they have a longer duration of sustaining themselves, because that's always a concern from the startup community. And from our point of view, and because we are from the IT industry, we've seen that in few areas like cybersecurity, analytics, blockchain, cloud, we're doing reasonably well. We've got a lot of companies who are actually, ensuring that they not only sell in India but sell globally. We sell globally, of course, because of the protection we get on the IP laws, and that's something again which I think this is the second point where I think we, as a country and government, should look at how we protect the IP and make it a little bit more tougher so that we support the startup industry. Last point which I'd like to mention, and I think this is a positive point, is of course we all know Bharat Bio and the Covaxin, which is all made in India. So I think that's something which we've done, and I think we're all proud of it because we are ahead of the curve. And I know apart from Bio, there's many other entities who are looking at building this another phase 3 and phase 2 of the trials, and I think that's positive. So we are on the right track. The idea is, yes, both not only from the government, but I agree even the private need to spend more time to ensure that we incentivize and help the startup community.
Chetan, my straight question to you again. The government says we have done more than any other government in the world. The spend, as far as the spend on researchers and R&D professionals, the private players who are not doing adequate. You take that blame. Are you saying that the government may have spent more vis-a-vis other governments, but you didn't create an environment for us to spend?
That's right. That's exactly what I want to mention. Because if we can create a policy which is much more enticing for both private entities and the semi-government, I think we can do far better. Even in terms of the universities, so that there's an equal level playing. If you look at globally, universities are the place where actually the most R&D happens, and that's an area where I think we as a country are lacking. So absolutely, I think it's the policies that they are able to make that more easy will do really well.
Dr. Lal, I'm tempted on this question to ask you as well, because if you read the economic survey report, it's a clear-cut, just getting the responsibility off my own shoulder, like government saying that, look at me, I'm doing enough vis-a-vis all other countries across the world. It's you who is not doing enough, so you better get started. But the government didn't create any R&D, any incentives for doing more R&D. Nothing was there in the union budget, but it's putting the blame on the private sector. Do you, as a private player, take that blame, or do you counter that? How would you look at it, Dr. Lal?
Aditya, once you have been in the so-called private sector, and in India you actually hit the nail on the head, that we are the people who give 76% of all OPD consultations and about 65 plus, all IPD consultations for inpatients in India. So this is a large thing, and we have only arrived at one conclusion, and with the government, you have got to keep on trying, keep on asking, and keep on telling them that this is a gap. And we don't feel bad about it, not because, we want to, put him a point, but the government's, problems in our sector at least are humongous. So unless you keep trying, and they say in Hindi ki, माँ भी बच्चे को दूध नहीं देती जब तक बच्चा रोएगा नहीं. So I think we have to bash on regardless and not feel bad about it. And I'm saying in a constructive way. And that has been our policy. And we see that, the government does listen. If you have a little bit of extra time in the end, I will tell you which are the things which are still pending from our healthcare sector, which have never been addressed in the budget. So I can come down to that, but if we have time.
Yes, Dr. Lal. And आपने एक बहुत अच्छा point बोला, very good point, Dr. Lal, because this government, one good thing about the government is that it responds. Because I myself know that we made representation on certain tax proposals, and many of them are seen the light of the day today. In this union budget, we see that they have been enshrined, they've been brought in as a part of the act. Apart from the tax leakages it was plugging in, but some of the proposals which would make life a little more simpler and a little more easier, they have accepted those proposals. So they listen. And you're right, we need to shake them up, we need to tell them, they respond.
Yeah.
R&D is something where I think so, which Chetan says, and probably you would also agree, that we need to create that incubation center, we need to create that environment where the private sector spends more on R&D and just not let it be at the will of the private sector. You need to create that positive environment to spend more on R&D.
Absolutely. I mean, you take a leaf out of the Singaporean government and many other governments, that it is started by the government and the private sector will, latch on.
Move to the next question, which is on the education sector. And this is directed to Dr. Sahu. Due to lockdown, online schooling took off in a big way, and the government introduced several measures to make online education accessible to all children. India will have the highest population of young people in the world over the next decade. National Education Policy 2020 was introduced to provide high-quality education opportunities to children. In the budget 21-22, government had mentioned about setting up Higher Education Commission of India, revamping the post-matric scholarship for welfare of scheduled castes, establish 100 new Sainik schools and 750 Eklavya schools in tribal region. More than 15,000 schools will be qualitatively strengthened to include all components of the National Education Policy. In spite of the government spending 3.5% of the GDP during the period 14-15 to 2021, an inflow of FDI to the extent of 3,245 million, India has performed below expectations in developing its primary and secondary education. India ranks 107. And at least there is a view that the main reason for poor performance is the poor pupil-teacher ratio, where we rank 118. What more can the government do? It's spending 3.5% of the GDP. So that's an ask. And if you look at the graph, where does India stand? It's in a very bad situation compared to the developed countries. So if you want to catch up with the Brazil, China, UK, US, Japan, we have a long way to go. Dr. Sahu, I invite your views on this.
Thank you, Aditya, again for a very, very critical and pertinent question. All of us sitting in this panel are sitting here because of our education and our educational background. And that speaks for any developed nation. Education has to be the core. First, health and education. These are the two things which make a country great. If you go through the basis on which the NEP document 2020 has been prepared, the basis was based on the survey that in India, unfortunately, 60% of the children who are in class 5 do not have the numeracy skill of class 2 and the literacy skill of class 1. And that's the fundamental basis on which you see the NEP document has been prepared, where the maximum emphasis has been given to the numeracy and literacy skills, and checkpoints have been decided. The checkpoint system is not new. Checkpoint system has been proven in UK, USA, Finland. But where I'm coming from is, this is one sector where definitely a lot needs to be done. But the good fact is, the present government is conscious that the education system needs to be revamped. So that government is also aware that the percentage GDP spent is half of what is being spent to make education to the international standard. So 6% is expected. And we are presently now hovering around 3.5 to 4% over the last 3-4 years. But I hope the way things are being planned, it will go to 6%. Now, where are the issues? The issues were in the structural reforms and the quality of the teaching learning processes, because we cannot blame the children. Children are raw. Children, brain develops between the age of 0 to 5, and in that period, if we are not able to intervene properly, I feel we are making a larger mass of our population unemployable. The fact that India, again, which is the government report, that about 70% of the graduates are graduates for the certificate's sake, but they do not have the skill to be employed into the various sectors of our developing and emerging economies. So the need of the hour is the structural reforms, and that has been very, very nicely depicted in the NEP 2020, where the concept of education 3+5 plus 3+4 is to be replaced from this 10+2 system, and the vocation and skill augmentation will be brought after the checkpoint of 8. That means 9, 10, 11, 12. The child knows what the child is good at, and accordingly, the skill of the child will be developed. If we look at the intervention, these are the intent, and the intent of the government and the document very, very nicely, and I think one of the best documents prepared by the Dr. Kasturi Rangan committee is, I think, one of the best reforms that could have been thought of, not only into bringing into India the autonomy into education sector, but also make it more democratic and improving the quality. Some of the features, if you give me time, I like to highlight how the projections have been made, and where some things could have been a little better. But however, as you have already stated, the 15,000 schools to be made as other schools. What has been seen is why the central government-sponsored schools like the Navodayas and the KVs are doing better, and the state-run, because education is a state subject, and the state-run schools are not doing better. So probably here comes the intervention of center, that every block there will be at least one primary school which will become a model school, which can be the anchor for the school cluster, which is all again provided in the policy. There is a lot of anomaly as far as the higher education was concerned. I'll come to the school education a little later, but there was a lot of anomaly on the higher education concerned, because there are too many regulatory authorities, to regulate, the school sector. Unfortunately, again, in our process of ease of doing business and digitization, what has in fact happened, I will only stick to what has happened in the school and in the education sector. More of regulations have come in, and more of checkpoints have been put in where the approvals are required. So maybe in the education sector, we are slowly moving into the license Raj indirectly, where I think a lot of loosening is required if you want to build the education infrastructure. The second aspect, which I think could have been a little done better, is the infrastructure funding for education sector. Unfortunately, in India till date, education was considered as philanthropy, unlike in the rest of the world. So if education is considered as philanthropy and out of CSR, so it is only out of the surplus of the corporates or the philanthropic purpose. We will be able to build education. But first time in the NEP document, if you see a word has come that there will be three types of schools. One will be the government schools, which are the public schools. The others will be the private schools, and the third will be the philanthropy schools. For the first time in India, the private schools are being considered and recognized, and the private educational institutions, higher educations, are for the first time being considered as the builders, which is an extremely positive step taken by government. So I think now the private players should come 2 steps to support the government with this initiative to develop the educational infrastructure of our country. The setting up of the National Higher Education Commission, I'm sure, is going to bring sanity of the higher ed, which was being controlled and monitored by 4 or 5 agencies like the UGC, like the Medical Council of India, the engineering was by a different body. So there were a lot of higher ed regulatory authorities, which now I think is going to be into a single authority. And the setting of the school standard authority in every state, I am sure is not only going to ramp up the quality of education of the government schools, but also of the private schools, which is extremely, extremely crucial. The setting up of the national professional standards for teachers. Teachers are the core of education. Whether they're the faculty in the higher ed or the faculty in the school education, they are the core, and no process, no digitization, no electronic or edtech intervention can replace a student from a teacher. Because it's not just, the flow of information to the child, there is also emotional quotient, or there is also an emotional development which takes place because of the relationship between a teacher and a student. So nothing in the world can replace a teacher. So in that context, we need to improve the quality of our teachers. So if you see the budget document says the 92 lakh teachers will be trained in the national education policy. And this training, 92 lakh teachers to be trained, is not face-to-face or physically. Here comes the digital intervention. The edtech companies of India will go at 10-fold increase in the coming 4 to 5 years. Here is a take, and that you saw the way, whatever FDI inflow of, 45 million you're talking of is purely 95% on the edtech, and maybe 1 or 2 will take the major chunk. Maybe I will not name, but all of us know where this money has gone. So the way we will be able to reach to the last mile child of India in the remotest corner is through edtech. And there has to be a mentor in each of these hamlets, and the flow of quality education by means of edtech, which will revamp the entire system of education of our country. I am very hopeful that India will definitely look up to a situation where you can have a complete online school, where you can do the registration and you can read online, you can clarify your doubts online, you can have a one-to-one session, because you can uniquely do that through the technology. And once this is done, it's a question of testing and certifying that you have that e-commerce. And that can be done through a testing agency, which I'm sure India is looking up. So, as I said, the reforms of the examination and the testing, we always say that as the PISA is concerned, India is lagging behind, but we should also look at the strengths of India. Wherever the situation of India for education is concerned, as I said in the beginning, the resilient Indians have always shown that in spite of all this, still we take education to our utmost priority. And that's why you see most of probably the bigger MNCs, India and abroad, are managed by Indians. That's because of not only of the type of grilling that we go through, the type of testing that is there all through in our life, but I think the amount of hardship that makes we Indians very strong. Having said that, I think a lot of issues are there as far as the pedagogy is concerned, which the NEP document is trying to address that. And I am in the in the consultative process of the NEP implementation. About 500 flow points have been made, where this time the entire government as well as all the implementing agencies are sure that they'll be able to, as a team, implement almost 85 to 90% of the NEP suggestions. If that's done, in the coming 5 years, the discussion, if we have the same discussion after 5 years, it will be at a different level and a different figure, and the different graphs you'll be showing us. So I think we are at the influx point. Everybody is now conscious of what is to be done. Government of India, as you said, this time government comes with constructive suggestions, constructive processes, and listens to people, listens to suggestion, and is at least open to try. This is what was lacking in India. Trying is better than not trying and failing. Trying and failing is acceptable because we learn from mistakes. But not trying and not implementing was breaking India. I think we are in the right path, and education focus, health focus will build India to be one of the brightest nations. I am very confident in the coming 5 years, irrespective of government, irrespective of the economy, irrespective of V-shape, K-shape, whatever the economists say, India is going to be one of the most developed nations in the coming 5 to 6 years because of our intrinsic strength, because of our internal demand. Tourism sector, if we are thinking of, this is the first time I see in tourism, Indians are exploring the destinations within India. It was, every Indian was trying, who can afford, was trying to go abroad and look. This is the first time.
Can I just, Dr. Saab? Yeah, Dr. Saab. Actually, we are just running out of time, so I may have to just. I can understand your passion for the education sector, and that's why your school, within the span of last 10 years, has reached such a great ranking, in one of the best rankings in India. And when you speak with the passion around education, it gets reflected in that. But probably we'll have to keep a separate session on national education policy with you. And I know there's a lot more you can tell us. But yes, one good thing, one good message you can carry from what you said was that, yes, the steps are in the right direction. If enacted well, we're going in the right direction. With this, I would want to move to the next question, which is, just one second. This is on it's in the hospitality and tourism sector. And this is to Mr. Bharat. COVID-induced, you spoke about it, we spoke in the early, but I would still want some views from you on this. COVID-induced lockdown and restriction on the movement of people had a negative impact on the tourism and hospitality industry, with suspension of flights and international arrivals falling by 72% globally over the first 10 months of 2020, contributing to the worst year in the history of tourism. It was seen that the popular tourist destinations across the world received 900 million fewer tourists during the period Jan to October 20, translating a loss of $935 billion. The tourism sector was anyway struggling with slowdown in 18-19, and I've seen graphs which show that India house was struggling under 18-19. There was a dip, there was a rise, there was again a dip, and there was a slight trend to increase when the COVID happened. Now, the tourism, as you rightly said, contributes 5% of India GDP, supports 13% of the total employment in India. Surprisingly, nothing much in the budget. You've already spoken. Just want to give us some closing statements on this.
So, exactly. I think presently we are going through a very dark period in terms of numbers, and the industry is really suffering. And the losses are just mounting. And I think that's where we really were looking for a lot of support. One thing good I heard in the budget was that there's going to be a lot of infrastructure spending, and that maybe would help us. But when it would happen is a question. But it definitely gives us a lot of hope because infrastructure makes a difference when it comes to tourism. And coming back to 2018 and 19, when the tourism receipts started reducing and tourists started coming down, our industry is extremely sensitive, and anything can just trigger off. It could be a Pulwama attack, or it could be a recession happening, or a border fight between China and America. Anything just triggers that off. And I think that was, so we were in a slowdown phase when it came to tourism, 2018, 19, if you see our receipts were coming down. And this has really hit us hard. And and as I said earlier, that we don't look at coming back any time before 23, 24, looking at our source markets, which is basically Europe, America. This is for foreign tourism. So foreign tourism does give us a lot of money, and we always want it. And when you compare ourselves, when we compare India to even a city-state like Singapore, that gets 20 million tourists, and India gets only 10 million tourists. So there's something that we are not doing right. And I think one of the reasons is that tourism it's nobody's baby, actually. And the priority is missing. It's neither in the concurrent list, it's neither in the state list. And we are just left to do our own thing. And if the IT industry could get such a boost, I feel tourism in India, we have a tremendous natural advantage, because there is no country like India in the world where you have snow in Srinagar, you have the beaches, you have the rivers, you have everything. God has blessed India abundantly. So we have a natural advantage, a population that speaks English, which is so, today it's an international language. So all the advantages are there. It's just a priority that the government must understand, and it must give it an identity, I feel. And that's what we are lacking. So whenever it comes, and definitely to give stimulus to the when we are treated, the industry, we are great in terms of employment generation, and we look after unskilled. You see, that's the best part. We take on people who are unskilled, which has huge numbers. So we earn foreign exchange, which smiles and services, which doesn't, make the country lose anything. We have a great employment base, and we have a natural advantage. So why aren't we making this happen for us? I think that's the question we keep asking ourselves. We ask stakeholders, and we ask the government. So this is something I feel is necessary in today's, tourism. Like one of the previous speakers mentioned about domestic tourism. I mean, all of us have experienced India better this time with the COVID. And domestic tourism is a huge market. And sometimes you won't need also foreign tourists to come. But again, you'll find there are 20 million tourists going abroad as compared to, say, 10 million tourists coming in. So more tourists go abroad, especially the high net worth and the rich people. Why aren't we experiencing India, which has everything? So this is something I feel we need to really focus on, to give it more of an identity, to give it a trust, as we have given other industries, and we keep focusing on. Why can't we have mentioned, the Honorable Finance Minister mentioned about creating areas of excellence when it comes to tourism, because we have certain areas in India which are known, like, for example, the Taj Mahal. So, to create an infrastructure to do something which puts us on par with international tourism and drives more tourism into the country. I think that is something we need to, focus more and more. But just coming back to the present, I'll just spend a minute, is that presently, I think what we need is a lot of support from the government, and we need a lot of support. We're not asking for any reductions. We're not asking for any reduction in taxes, though that would be good. But just deferment of certain of our expenses, which have happened in this unprecedented time, which we never have envisaged, that we would have to close down businesses, and we would have to close down our operations for 8 months, 9 months. And also for our employees and for those who are working, which is a huge base. I mean, so many have lost their jobs. So some sort of a stimulus, some sort of a sensitivity, I feel needs to be demonstrated towards this industry. And I really look forward to some announcements coming even after the budget as we keep on lobbying and keep on making our case heard. So this is something which I feel is a difficult period, and we are really very versed in.
I completely agree. We need to take a cue from Mr. Lal's book, where he says that you need to make more representations and probably a little more lobbying.
Yes.
Because we have seen the government does respond, but probably a lot more lobbying, a lot more cohesive effort, a lot more effort of all of you doing it in a singular manner, rather than multiple forums in the government. Because you contribute, you employ 13% of the employment in India is being given by you. So there's a lot which comes from you, and you and the country owes it to you. Thank you. With this, I would like to move to the next question, which is on inflation due to food articles, and that's to Jayan. Supply side shocks, especially owing to COVID-19 pandemic effect, affected the retail inflation, with food articles contributing to overall rise in inflation. After consistently rising for 6 months since Q1 of 2021, the ease of supply side restriction in December 20. The easing of supply side restriction December 20, inflation fell back into RBI's target range of 4 plus minus 2% range to reach 4.6% year on year, as compared to 6.9% just 1 month back in November 2020. The increased inflation in the current year was mainly driven by rise in food inflation, which increased from 0.1% in 18-19 to 6.7% in 19-20. Well, people say that was keeping the economy live and ticking. But but it did bring it with itself the element of inflation, and further to 9.1% in April to December 2021. However, the swift steps taken by the government eased food inflation significantly, 3.4% in December 20, from a high of 11% in October 20. Fuel inflation remains an area of concern, mainly due to increasing crude oil prices and high tax levied by both central and state governments. Food inflation has already eased in December, reducing overall inflationary pressures. Going forward, as food inflation eases due to government efforts, will this be nullified by rising fuel costs? This is my question to you. And in this regard, I just want to depict this diagram, where if you see the CPI food inflation, which has got essentials as a part of it, it was at its peak in December 19, then again in March 20, April 20, rather than April 20, it again rose. And now, again, it was high, but in December, the government is able to contain it. In this regard, your comments, Jayan?
Aditya, it's a good observation. But on a lighter note, you and the country has moved ahead with tabs, basically talking about the digital economy, and the farmers are still holding the khata wahi. Okay, so the point to be noted is inflation to consumer is actually income to the producers. Okay, so on one side, if the government is talking of doubling the farmer's income, the consumers should be as well prepared to shell out something extra for the food they get. Okay, having said that, let me admit the dairy is not a part of this food inflation chart which you have shared with us here. Actually, we were under tremendous pressure because we handle actually 20% more milk. The hotels, restaurants, the roadside stalls, all had stopped during the inflation, during the pandemic. And so all the milk came to the organized sector and cooperatives like us. And the prices of commodities actually fell a lot, and still we managed to survive and keep the farmers, keep paying a good price to the farmers and not charging more from the customers, and managing to balance the stock and other things that we had. So the point here is agriculture still employs 60% of the country's population, and the government did make intention very clear that while they will try to keep the food inflation within a certain band, okay, but it should not be at the cost of the farmers getting the right price of the products they make. And so the biggest investment which was announced in the right from the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan announcements in the May onwards, where the government said they will have a 1 lakh crore rupees agriculture infrastructure fund. Right there, and they said they will support processing of agriculture food products right at the farm gate level, and it was basically announced in form of an interest subvention loan of about 3% and so on and so forth. But now when you're not just talking, you are also walking the talk with this agriculture, infrastructure and development cess. So whenever an urban consumer goes and fills up his tank of fuel, or you buy a piece of gold, or you have an alcoholic beverage which is imported one, or India imports certain quantity of edible oils, of coal, and so on and so forth. Each one of us will contribute a small amount, which will go into that agriculture infrastructure fund, development in form of a cess, which will go in form of a fund, which will lead to helping infrastructure boosting in the rural areas. So what we are basically trying to do is reduce the urban-rural divide. Okay, the country will not grow well if only the urban area grows and the rural area is left behind. Okay, because still large number of people are there, and India still will be 50% urban, 50% rural till 2050. So you have hands to feed, you have hands to produce, you have mouths to feed, and that balance has to be done. So which with the current measure in this recent budget announcement, the government is trying to reduce that imbalance between the rural and urban areas, putting more focus on creating infrastructure, particularly related to agriculture in the rural areas. I mean, dairy we have seen. So dairy doesn't get a big country. I mentioned about dairy being such a large component of India's agriculture, but the budget for dairy is hardly 3,000 crore rupees. So you divide by 30 states, it's only 100 crore per state. And at Amul, we invest 10 to 15 times more than that every year. So it's not a question of the budget giving money to it. Budget giving support to a particular sector is a good indication of walking the talk. And that you add up with other support, like the scheme which the Honorable Minister talked about was the PLIS. So if you have a production-linked incentive scheme and the government actually willing to put money to promote made in India products across the world. So that's a very good signal which you are giving, that A, you want to make local industries self-sufficient, support them in infrastructure, make them grow bigger, not only nationally, but also internationally. So this is what I think is the step in the right direction. And if the consumers pay good and decent price for the raw material, the farmers will progress, the country will progress. Thank you.
Mehta, in a very subtle way, you slipped in the concept that we need to pay more to the sector, the agri sector, and ask the consumer. They may have a contribution. Ask the house, completely contribute to this. Okay. I'll move to the last question, where I would take everyone's views. And I would request each of you to just give a closing statement also on this on this question also. Give your views and also make a closing statement, because I don't think so we have enough time to get a closing statement from everybody. Please restrict yourself to a minute. I'm sorry, but we've run out of time. This is about ease of doing business, and this is government has been so open that we were at 100, and I believe they were at 130 rank in 2016 in ease of doing business. They've come down to 63 rank in 2020, but now they feel stifled. They say we cannot go better, and there are some fundamental issues, and it's acknowledged that the fundamental issues are with itself. It's not with like the way they put the blame on R&D and innovation on the private sector. They are on defensive to some extent on the intensity of lockdown. So they justified everything, but here they openly acknowledge that this is a problem and we need to solve it. And that, I think, so that's, when you acknowledge a problem, your half problem is solved. So India's administrative process suffers from an overregulation, which was acknowledged in the Economic Survey 2021. An illustration showed that for a company to undergo voluntary liquidation, it takes 1,570 days. That means roughly between 4 to 5 years just to get it struck off from a register of company. And this is in a situation where there's hardly any litigation or dispute. Just the paperwork will take 4 to 5 years. Just imagine if there was a litigation to strike off a company from the list, from the registrar of companies, and wind up and close everything, it would take probably a decade. Now, if you look at it, and where does India stand on the regulatory enforcement overall ranking? It has got bad from 15 to 20. So I'm sure we did very well in the other, that we could square off this negative aspect. The government regulations effectively enforced, we have got bad from 87 to 104. Government regulations applied and enforced without improper influence, 74 to 107. So I'm happy that the government is openly acknowledging that in its tenure, something has gone wrong. In its overzealous approach to catch hold of defaulters and weeding out the corruption, probably it's gone on overdrive. And that is where it is pulling it down. So it's not helping up improve its ranking in the ease of doing business on this. So World Bank in the World Bank's ease of doing business report of 2020 shows that improvement in the overall ease of business doing rank. India lags behind in categories of starting a business, registering property, where countries rank is 136 and 154. And similarly, if I look at the access to the judiciary, to resolve a simple commercial contract, India takes 1445 days, whereas in a developed country it takes roughly 600 days. And in a country like Singapore, and we know where Singapore stands today, is 120 days. So the rule of law in India is very bad. With this, I would like to ask Dr. Lal this question, that you feel the union budget, because it did address many of these points, it did bring in some resolution for a taxpayer who's got a issue of 10 lakhs, whose income is 50. They've tried to make it faceless to weed out corruption, but would that actually slow down the process or defer the process? If I cannot meet my officer, I cannot explain my case in person. So looking at all of what is happening, will things worsen with what changes have been brought in by the government to weed out corruption? Will things get worsened? So I would start with Dr. Lal, and Dr. Lal, please also make a closing statement. How would you rate the budget on a scale of 1 to 5? 1 being very good.
Yeah. So, Aditya, the short answer for this, the ranking of India as far as corruption and ease of business is concerned is a very difficult thing. It requires more than 5 minutes, I think. But all I can say is that one thing which I can, point out in the right direction is that under Modi's Hub, it is possible. Point number one. Point number two, it is also possible if you, digitize more things than small ones. And here the last mile connectivity is, by the way, getting into the way. Maybe people have picked up or not picked up, but the Defense Ministry has now given some, for 5G, some extra megahertz to the government, which was a very old kind of a thing. So I can tell you offhand that, well, telemedicine, etc., is not going to work if we don't have internet in the villages. That's what I would like to say. As far as the ranking is concerned, if the government implements what I had talked about, and it is really 27% increase by adding those 10,700 crores extra, and vaccination is just one time kind of a thing, then I would give this budget 6 out of 10, otherwise 5 out of 10. But these things I really don't do right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lal. Chetan, would you want to, I want to get your view?
Sure. I think the best thing to do here and for ease of business, there's nothing better than automation. And I think if we can automate, there's close about 12 processes that takes place when you're starting a business. We can automate all of those 12, to be honest. And I think, and that could be even with the tax filing, which we were luckily now looked at the faceless kind of thing that's come in the budget. And that's very exciting because the more and more automation and the more faceless, options that people have in terms of filing their applications, I think that can just make sure that things get much more easier in terms of doing business. Of course, I think one of the crucial laws, and that's something which all faces, the labor-related laws, and of course the background check that happens for every potential employee. These are things that if we can automate the background check, in terms of for each of the employees, would be great to understand. I think these are things that each one of us are facing. So those are a few thoughts from my side. We're on the right track with the whole digitization concept. There is now digital education, digital, of course, payments, and we are going in that phase, which is great. But I think there is much more that can be done rather than doing this in a piecemeal kind of way. So,
Chetan, I'm a chartered accountant. I'm not leaving you without a number, so I want to score.
All right. So I would say about 6 out of 10.
6 out of 10. Okay.
Yeah.
Sao?
Yeah, I think you have said it very nicely in this slide. We know as in India, where do we stand? But I think there is first time a hope that India can fare better. and India is recognizing to do it better. And I think this government is listening and trying to do things better. The biggest problem, I think, for business and for any entity in India, personally, for me, I look at is the enforcement of contract. So I probably comes from whether you want to be a Ram or you want to be Krishna. So if you are in the Ram age, probably it is right or wrong, and if you are wrong, you're just punished. But if you are Krishna, in the wrong thing, if you do it the right way, or if you do it through the legal system or the laws, not breaking the laws, but you do a wrong thing, you'll never be caught. So I think India is in the phase of Mahabharata, Krishna, where if you have done something wrong but illegally admittable, you can never be punished, and it can go on for years and years, or even for generations. I think that needs to change. So I think we have to probably go into the Ram age rather than the Krishna age. And the number, yeah, I know you'll ask me the number. So if whatever is stated in the budget, as a Dr. Lal said, I'm fully in agreement with him. I think if the intent is there, but if it is implemented, I will give a 7 out of 10 for this budget. In this time, there could not have been a better budget than this.
Wow, that's a good score actually in these times. If someone is giving a 7 out of 10, and I think so, that's a very interesting.
But with a caveat, if it is implemented.
I know. The proof of the pudding is in eating it actually. So if this is all implemented, yes, it's a 7 on 10. Mr. Mehta, your views?
Yes, I think we've raised very interesting and important issues. But then, if you look at it in totality, I mean, you can say starting with less of government, more of governance, and then taking away multiple steps to keep, have more emphasis on private sector or the independent entities, including startups, getting more into business and doing things which the country needs to develop. All these things augur well for us, and it will, in the years to come, help us propel in the higher numbers as far as and better ranks as far as this vital index is concerned. So we're a bit positive about it and a lot bullish about way in which the country and the direction in which we are all going. So this is the take on the budget. See, it was these have been difficult times, and the scripting of budget actually and the announcement of policy started right from May onwards, and we ended up in yesterday. So given the current situation and the times we are in, and the approach the government is taking to not only tide over the crisis, but also take the economy forward, makes us believe that it is a good budget, and it would require, to support this budget, we need to give a higher score. So my score is about 8.5 to 9 out of 10.
Wow. I wish Modi was listening, and ma'am, Honorable Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman was listening to this. Last, Mr. Bharat, one was affected due to this pandemic. I know there were a lot of expectations, didn't come, but I would want your ranking, and obviously a small comment on the way the judiciary processes, the way commercial contracts are enforced, the way you can strike off a company in 1,500 days vis-a-vis other countries. So just closing statement on all of this.
Just pertaining to my industry, just to give you a small example, it would require 30 licenses to renew every year to run our industry, our hotels, for example, compared to, say, a Singapore, which you mentioned earlier, would just require 2. So that's the comparison. It has come down, but this is where we stand. So as tourism is everyone's business, we need a one-stop shop. I think that's what we've been clamoring for. We need a one-stop shop where we can go to one department or one government department that, helps us in getting what we need. So this is a constant problem because, as I said, we are related to everything around us. Well, on the marking side, Aditya, I think I have to answer to my colleagues who are very disappointed. So I think you give the ranking, and I'll stick to it. So I'll leave that to you.
Well, I think so. Overall, I can conclude that it was not so bad a budget, and there's a saying, old adage, which says that you say that there's no news is good news. So from a tax front, if you ask me, there was no news on certain aspects, no COVID tax, no cesses, no surcharges. There was no news on many of the angles, and that's the way I would rank it. No news is good news on certain angles. Yes, there have been some smart tactical moves by the government to reduce litigation. But there's no fiscal stimulus which is there. That's the only thing which is missing, which I feel in this budget.
Yes.
Being contained, being controlled, being composed as you put up your budget, everything was there. But there was some need of fiscal stimulus. That's what is missing. Some incentive, something that is whether in a GST, whether in a customs or anywhere. You have straightened the laws, you have improved the laws, you have brought down the litigation, but you've not put a fiscal stimulus. That is what is missing in the budget. That's my take on this. And Angana, over to you. Thanks. I think so we overshot by a long time, but this was quite interesting and I couldn't resist myself from continuing.
To sum up, Aditya, just one word is Atmanirbhar. I think that's something we're learning.
That's what the country has been relying on, and that's where we stand, sir. If we have done well, it's Atmanirbhar, not Atmanirbhar with the government, but Atmanirbhar within ourselves.
With ourselves, yes.
Yeah, very true.
Thank you all. So it was great to hear from the industry leaders from the very relevant sectors, particularly this year on the Union Budget 21-22. So we close the session here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Aditya, for being a wonderful host and preparing so much and so well despite such a short time. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you.
All of you.
Thank you, sir, and,
Thank you, Aditya. Thank you.
for all the
Thank you,
panelists, for giving this opportunity to be with such a great panel.
Thank you. Thank you all of you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.